Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Maria Teresa Tancredi and I'm a PhD student in the Crop and Soil Sciences Department here at the University of Georgia. I have the pleasure of welcoming you to this panel discussion around the film Gather, the Fight to Revitalize Our Native Foodways. Before we move to the introduction of our panelists, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land where the University of Georgia and the Athens community stand today was the traditional territory of the Muskogee Creek Nation, and that the history of this land is linked to the history of enslaved and exploited people. I encourage you to reflect on the meaning and consequences of these past actions as we proceed with our conversation today. This afternoon, we have a chance to chat with the protagonists of Gather, and I'm pleased to introduce Samuel, Nephi, and Twila. Samuel is an enrolled member of the Yurok Tribe and a co-founder of the Ancestral Guard. Nephi is the founder of the Native American Culinary Association and chef and creator of Café Gojo. And Twila is, which I'm sure will join us in just a few minutes, is a forager, food educator, and advocate for indigenous food sovereignty. Last but not least, our moderator, Professor Alfred Dick, director of the UGA Environmental Ethics Certificate and contributor to the book, Native Foodways, Indigenous North American Religious and Traditions and Foods. Now, I would like to leave the stage to Dr. Jennifer Thompson, Associate Researcher Scientist and Director of the UGA Sustainable Food Systems Initiative.
Thank you, Maya. I just want to also echo that welcome and want to extend my gratitude to our panelists today. And just tell you just a few words about the Sustainable Food Systems Initiative at UGA. We're really excited to host this screening. And the screening of Gather will continue through Friday. So please, if you have not yet checked out the film, the link is on our website. And we're super excited about this panel conversation today. UGA's Sustainable Food Systems Initiative believes that tackling the grand challenges of food security, resilience, and equity require an interdisciplinary approach, and none of us can do it alone. And this film really kind of exemplifies that as well. We're really grateful to UGA's College of Ag and Environmental Sciences and USDA's National Needs Fellowship, which supports the Sustainable Food Systems Initiative and our commitment to hosting events like this. That USDA National Needs Fellowship supports interdisciplinary graduate education in the Sustainable Food Systems Initiative, Sustainable Food Systems, and it's helped us develop a new graduate certificate. So please check out the website again to learn more about that. I'm so pleased to host this screening of Gather and the panel. And so I don't really want to take another minute away from our conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our moderator, Georgia Power Professor in Environmental Ethics and the Director of the Environmental Ethics Certificate Program, Alfie Vick. Please take it away.
Thank you, Jen and Maya. And I'd like to add my welcome to our panelists and again, express how thankful we are that you're taking the time today to spend with us and to reflect on some of the important and urgent issues that are presented in this film. It's really an honor to be with you here today. And also, let me just welcome all the attendees here. I think we have close to 70 people registered for this event, and that's wonderful. Happy Earth Day, everyone. And also, I hope everyone has had a chance to watch this wonderful film during our virtual screening. As Jen said, there's still an opportunity for you to watch that through tomorrow. But for this Zoom panel, for attendees, we have both the Q&A and the chat functions active. And we just ask that if you have any questions you'd like us to ask, please type them into the Q&A. We'll keep an eye on that and we'll redirect your questions to the panel as appropriate. We'd like to use the chat function to share any related resources or thoughts as the conversation is going, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. So with that, let me kind of jump right in here. And Nephi and Sammy, welcome. I want to congratulate you on this moving and beautiful film that you've been a part of. As I watched it, I know I felt transported to your side. And whether that was foraging in the field with Twila, or in the tasting room with you, Nephi, or on the water with you, Sammy, I feel like we probably all feel like we've gotten to know you in some ways. And I guess that, I maybe along those lines want to start out by asking you that the film's been out for about a year now, and I know you certainly were filming it for some time before that. What are some important updates to the projects that you've been working on that we now are somewhat familiar with from the film? Are there anything that you wanted to share about how the reaction to the film has helped you along your path to these efforts that you've been working on?
I can start. I think first off, thank you for supporting the film and taking the time to watch and enjoy. I'm delighted to hear that you identified with our plight and some of the issues we present or that are presented in the film. You are very right; they are very urgent and pressing. So appreciate the sentiment. For us, when you meet us in the film, we are in our soft opening activities of Café Gaujon. And so literally about 3 to 4 weeks later, the Arizona governor's office issued their shelter in place order, and we've been closed ever since. But that hasn't stopped our work. We have shifted into different types of telehealth and other types of outreach for the cafe. And now that, at least in Arizona, in my part of the state, and on the Apache tribe, the vaccination efforts are pretty rigorous, and the social distancing and just consciousness of the pandemic have helped us to manage it a little bit in our community, way better than it was in the summer. But we're still being cautious. I think for the film, it has really produced a heightened awareness about some of our works. I hope that it has also validated other Native people's experiences with foodways, because in the film, we're a microcosm of what's happening all over Indian country, from Alaska through Canada, through the US, all the way into South America and Mexico. So there are many, many themes that are universal. And so I hope that this can continue to be shared and continue to be talked about and discussed for, many more years to come. So we'll see what happens. But thank you for that question.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm thankful for this opportunity to be able to share my story and talk about, what we've been up to lately. And Gather was filmed a couple years ago, and one of the biggest differences you might realize, my hair has gotten a little longer in the back there, and that's happened to do with the quarantine, which we all experienced, and COVID-19, and it's changed the world that we live in today, but it hasn't changed our goals. It hasn't changed our initiatives. It hasn't changed our energy and dedicating that energy to provide healthy opportunities for our people. We've simply made the transformation from these large community concepts to more interpersonal ways of bringing food sovereignty aspects into the everyday lives of our community. For instance, you see back in the background, that was my brother Peter here. He's a cultural director for the Ancestral Guard, and we've been putting in work on these. So what these are, this space right here, we've just acquired from the Yurok Tribal housing, and we're building garden boxes for younger children around here, some lower on the ground for early education stuff, and some higher ones for families to assist the home gardening systems that we have outside their houses right now. So through that, it gives us an opportunity to plant organic soil, or plant organic start plants in organic soil using, methods of hugelkultur and other indigenous methods of farming, bringing that into their household so we can really focus on developing strong relationships with delivering micronutrients to the families in a way that's accessible for all. So we wouldn't have this opportunity right now if COVID-19 didn't put a lot of people align their values and goals with food sovereignty. Because when that happened, it stopped a whole food systems, and those food systems that have been, generally destructive to our existence have now been under review. And we've been trying to push food sovereignty for around, 8-10 years now on local reservation. I almost got kicked out of the only gas station in Klamath, which is one of the only foodways as well, for talking about it when I was younger. But now today, you see, I'm thankful that we have the opportunity to help lead the way as Indigenous youth who developed this program, and the First Nations Development Institute and the people from the Gather Film who invested in us to be able to see that and give us an opportunity to prove ourselves. It's been an amazing journey.
That's great. Yeah, Sammy, you just mentioned when you were showing the raised beds, how you're using those to work with the youth in your community. And in the film, so many of the stories and experiences that were shared, you all had youth at your side, learning from you as you were working and passing along traditional knowledge to that youth. And I wonder if, Sammy, if you could talk a little bit about what some of the most effective ways are that you've found to engage youth, get them enthused and excited about the work that you're doing so that they can take in that knowledge and carry it on.
Well, the first thing we got to talk about is we say food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is kind of a word that we use to describe. It means it's different. It means different things to people. For me, what food sovereignty is taking care of the people I love. And we say Natommer, it's the people you love who love you back. And when there's that connection and reciprocity, it helps people grow. And so it comes back to our values and keeping to those core values of world renewal and being able to provide opportunities for future generations. And it's all in the mindset that we keep and we pass and we help recreate, because there's a lot of traditions and there's a lot of cultures within our lives. And traditions are the things, and they always get muddled together. So traditions are the things that our parents have always done that we continue to do. And our culture is constantly changing on a daily basis, constantly evolving and adapting and creating this experience, which we call life. So being able to take gardens and turn it into a tradition within a generation. Right now, my brother Peter, he's about to have his first child, his boy, and that child will not know what it's like to grow up without fresh access to fresh produce that has been grown by your family, and that's what we're doing. So if we want to change the system, we have to change the way we are working within our communities to adapt to new food structures. And the only way to really get youth involved in that is to make it beneficial to them. There's work programs where they can just come in and work all day, but do they really see the benefits, the whole process? Are their families being fed? Are we actually taking a look at what's affecting these families and improving their lives on a daily basis? These are the questions that we had to ask ourselves, and these are what continue to drive us. So with these Victorious Gardens initiative, we're taking the experience and we're delivering it straight to the household, but we're also giving them a certain level of accountability, responsibility, and opportunity to, make mistakes, because we'll have an assisted gardening program once a week where an Ancestral Guard member will come to the house, we'll water the garden, we'll answer any questions, do weeding, and really thoroughly give them the whole experience and guaranteeing a positive outcome of a harvest. So it starts kicking up within these kids at a young age. They see the productiveness. And so when they get older, that's going to be in their subconscious. When they get hungry, when they need to feed their family, when they need to do something, they'll say, I know how to build a garden, I can do that. And that's what we're trying to restore, because in our communities, it's always been fishermen versus farmers, because it comes down to water. And we're breaking those boundaries and we're setting the example. If you look online, we also have another film called Guardians of the River, and it takes an in-depth look into our programming with our gardening initiative. And we're planning on open sourcing all of this to the local communities around us.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that, all of that information and updates. And sounds like incredible work that's going on there. And you were talking about adapting traditions, and at Nephi, that makes me think of some of the work that you're doing with the cafe. And clearly you're blending some of your experience in fine dining and restaurants in California and other places, and then bringing that together with the native food traditions. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what is your approach for, adapting the traditional knowledge of food to the format and the presentation that you think will work for today?
Well, I think, excuse me. Well, I think one of the very powerful elements and keys to that creating a formula per se is that traditional ecological knowledge across Native communities is it's its own universe. There's a wealth of information and approaches and techniques that are culturally rooted to landscapes and communities. And they're colored and diversified by the people that hold that knowledge and wisdom. So, and then you take kind of current practices and modalities in like mental health or traditional, like for me in the drug addiction, substance abuse and mental health work, like 12-step concepts and, different treatment approaches. You can really kind of fuse something together. At least my approach is to fuse something together that takes principles and values of some of therapy culture that don't necessarily conflict too much with indigenous values and spiritual beliefs. And I feel like one of the segues through that is through the behavioral aspect of indigenous foodways. So if you look across clinical culture, healing modalities, all these different types of health approaches, a lot of the formula to healing is a change in behavioral practice, a change in habits, even a change in cognitive abilities. So I feel like when you are engaged in the foodways, whether you're in Alaska or in the Great Plains or in the American Southwest, you're going to have an opportunity to interact and behave differently through foodways. Whether it's at home cooking, which is kind of a family, you could say it's a family intervention tool. You could say out in the garden where you're, absorbing vitamin D from the sun and learning about composting to process trauma and grief, There's harvesting and action-oriented group dynamic projects like harvesting and foraging together, or even harvesting, agricultural produce that we're growing. So, and then add into that the spiritual and cultural historical dimension of indigenous foodways. We can learn so much from the true history that the indigenous foods and the cultivars teach us, because when we look at the history of the United States, the master narrative is written and produced by the oppressor, and indigenous peoples and BIPOC communities are the oppressed group. And so the historical narrative around food and food systems is written not from an indigenous lens. It's not truly representative of the indigenous American landscape. It's kind of taking colonial ideas and forcing them onto a landscape's paradigm, so to speak, right? Forcing an identity on the land and the people. And so when you follow the cultivars, the scientific history, the anthropological, the botanical, you get to find this whole complex and sophisticated history of trade, economy, in ancestral intelligence, from Argentina all the way to Alaska. So I feel like when we follow the scientific and historical roots of foods and landscapes, we can really, really kind of unweave some of this tightly woven colonial narrative that's written about us, not by us. And to me, it's so cool. It's like this food history and this indigenous food sovereignty concept and movement is like a graphic novel where indigenous foods are gonna help save the world. They're the cultivars, they're the heroes, they're the advocates. We're just the conduits. So that's kind of what I have to say about that. It's pretty neat.
That's great, thank you. And Jen, at any point, if you want to follow up or things are coming to mind, please jump in. Well, kind of switching gears a little bit, but although following up on that, I think there's a common message throughout the film that, and as you've just expressed, that restoring and cultivating native food traditions certainly improves the health of people. But there's also throughout the film examples of how those native food traditions can help the health of the land. I think examples with the buffalo and the native grains and even salmon are all a part of an ecosystem. And I'm wondering if both of you want to weigh in on this. With the recent appointment of Secretary Deb Haaland as the first Native Secretary of the Interior, are there any specific opportunities that you see to advance federal land policy that would support Indigenous food sovereignty over the next few years as she's in that powerful position?
Yes, that's why I finally found out how football fans feel when I was watching Deb go through that process. I was screaming at the TV, like it was a very I felt like a personal experience, because for the first time in my life, I seen somebody in position that controls so much of my livelihood and my everyday life, and somebody that actually looks like me, understands what the struggles we've been through, and cares about a vast majority of the people that inhabit these lands today. So giving me that kind of feeling led me to all kinds of inspiration to continue to do what needs to be done. And when it comes to land management practices, the first thing I have to say is, we have to get the federal government on board. We have to get our local politicians on board. That's where it starts, in our local leadership, to support Indigenous-based land management practices. Because personally, I believe if you're part of a conservation effort, and that conservation effort is not including the Indigenous people that belong to that area, or is not including Indigenous land management practices or pushing them to the forefront, you are part of modern colonization. And that's just a fact of life that we have to deal with today. And for a lot of us, it's common, but we have to understand that doesn't mean that, you're a terrible person, everything that you've ever done is wrong. What it means is that we've come into a time within the United States where not only is Indigenous-based land management practices acceptable, but it is the 100% solution to what is this crisis that our people are facing today. When it comes to wildfires in California, it's no longer Indigenous people that fire lands is ripping through. If you look last couple seasons, even the Kardashians got chased out of their California household by wildfire, but a lot of families don't have that private firefighters to protect their households. But we did do for thousands of years was work these systems of reciprocity that exist within the land, and to ensure that our people are living healthy lifestyles. And only in modern America have we been cut off from those opportunities. It's been less than a couple hundred years. And so for the American federal government to acknowledge the importance of Indigenous land-based Indigenous land management practices is one of the most important things that we can push. We need to start fighting fire with fire to protect water sources. We need to start looking at how restoring river systems can actually do good for the agricultural community. Because when we have restored river systems and creeks that aren't suffocated by invasive species, and we have money to put the river restoration crews that exist today that are waiting, once we have the funding to implement those types of things, we are going to see dramatic increases in the quality of life for our people that live on our river. But there's such a huge divide between agricultural and river communities. When, if you look at it in the reality, when the state of California, one of the greatest economies, in the world, most of their natural resources are diverted from the poorest communities in California. I live within those communities, and it's being directly sucked down south and privatized by the agricultural by agricultural businesses, and then privatized. And you can now invest on the stock market in Klamath River water that is derived from up north and stored down south. And that's just a sad reality that we live in. There's so much divide within the communities and the solution is interconnection and understanding that water is not, we can't just keep taking it. We have to be able to unite the agricultural realm with protecting the rivers and the systems at which they all need to live, because as long as there's no reciprocity within that system, we're dying out up here. And then once we die out, the whole system's gone. And that's what we're dealing with today. And we see it more and more. If you want to learn about where the world is going with water and what that war is going to look like, look no farther than the Klamath Basin, because it's all laid out in front of you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I think such a powerful kind of statement and reaction. And I agree. I think there's a lot of opportunity to to kind of shift some federal land management policy to be more aligned with the well-being of your communities and others, for sure. Twila, welcome. We introduced you a little bit earlier, but I'm glad you're able to to join us. And what we were just discussing here, what Sammy was just talking about, was reaction to a question I asked about whether with the appointment of Deb Haaland to Secretary of the Interior, if there were any opportunities that come to mind, based on some of the stories that you were able to share in the film, that are opportunities to align some federal policy in support of the efforts that you all have been working on over the last few years. And Nephi, if you have any reaction to that as well, welcome to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very opportune time. I think there are a number of things that brought a lot of consciousness to health across the world because of the pandemic. And I feel like kind of mirroring what Sammy said about how the pandemic kind of forced a lot of people or communities to align their values. That kind of goes in sync with the consciousness of like land back movements, or access to land for indigenous peoples. And so I feel like having this opportunity, even for yourself, mentioning it and bring it up, I think all of us have the opportunity to use our voices at different levels, because it's definitely required, from university advocacy to community members to larger institutions and companies that are that identify with the sentiment and values that of indigenous peoples and peoples of color in our journey to reclaim health and develop our strength in our communities even more through foodways. So I really hope that these types of discussions can translate into leverage for our communities in a multitude of different ways, just because it's going to require the kind of the grassroots community, like those of us on the panel, but then also the institutional sector, the governmental sector, and people that have access to a large amount of resources like companies and corporations. So we'll see what the future holds. It's definitely an opportune time, so keep talking about it so it doesn't get out of mind. You know what I mean? So thanks.
Yeah. Twila, are you still with us? You look like you made it out to a site you can forage on, unless that's just a still photo. Yeah, she might still be in transition.
I'm going to jump in if you don't mind, maybe.
Please.
And Twila, if you can hear us, please feel free to interrupt at any time. One of the things that I've heard both in the film and in the conversation right now parallels with a book that I'm reading as part of UGA's. UGA has a faculty learning community that's focused on sustainability, and we're reading Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And there are so many parallels between some of her stories and lessons and those in this film. And one of the things I just heard you talking about, one of the things in the film that really stands out to me is kind of what it means to be in community, and not just among people, but among human and non-human beings. And that kind of mutual responsibility. And so I guess one of the things that I would love to get some of your kind of thoughts about is that for people who have never had the experience of, sort of foraging, for example, if Twila was on, but it looks like she bounced off, but, becoming intimate with a landscape, so if you have any thoughts or advice for young people who, maybe have not had the opportunity to fish, grow food for themselves, sort of connect with the bounty of the landscape. Do you have advice for young people to sort of make those connections or begin to build those connections? I'm gonna toss it to you, Sammy, if you don't mind.
Yes, that's a great question. And for us, when we started, we operated as one of the only self-sustaining youth groups in Delaware County for a few years before we even thought about becoming a nonprofit organization. Matter of fact, we've already started working with indigenous communities from Malaysia and Brazil before we even became a nonprofit organization. And one of the huge components behind that was youth, and that was a driving force. And when they even asked us to go down to Brazil, I was so scared because I thought there's nothing that I can offer these people. Why would they want to talk to us? Why did they send us for us? But when we got there, the first question they asked was, how did you guys survive living over 100 years with a dam on your river? How are you still here? And that's when it switched the switch in my mind, that there's very little people in the United States that get the opportunity to grow up on the same exact creek that their grandfather did for thousands of generations, and drink from the same water source and fish the same watering holes. And it really became apparent to me that what a blessing it truly was, because we didn't want to. There's types of people who make time for your culture, and then there's people that try to make time for you out of what they're doing with their culture. And that's what it is. We didn't have a choice. Salmon sustained our life, and it wasn't like we wanted to live off salmon. It's not like we wanted to do these things. It's because we didn't have an option. And that's when you talk about conserving these places, when you talk about it, the thing is, you have to be there. You have to experience it yourself. Your teachers cannot teach you how to be involved within certain communities. They give you the guidance that you need to be able to enter these communities respectfully. And that's what we need. We need people to enter these places with respect and be open and understand that even if you've been studying that same space for the last 8 years, you're still not going to have more knowledge than the local person who grew up there about that land area. So respect that and acknowledge that if you want to be a part of something, you have to love it first. So we operate off these systems of values. As a man of world renewal, I have a system of values that I incorporate into everything I do. And the first one is I try to take care of myself physically, mentally, spiritually. And having the opportunity to have gardens and stuff in our life has really helped me focus on that. And that's something you work on every day. And if you do this, you build these systems. It's called Natantmer is what we say. And those are the people you love who love you back. You build up systems with these people. And once you find people who share that reciprocity with you, who when you invest your time into them, they invest it back into you. Because you can invest your time and your love and your resources into programmings and people and places. And if you don't feel that love, then it's not it. So once you do that, it should inspire. Once you find out you're in a Natantmer, people who love you back, it should inspire everybody to take care of the land, which we all need to continue these opportunities for future generations. So it's when you take yourself out of the idea that you are the one, because as millennials, we're always taught, you're the one, you're the one. But in reality, that's not it. We have to realize that the person that's going to solve the problems may not have even been born yet. We have to look at that generation as if the person who is in there is within that generation. And everything we've dedicated our lives to is make sure they have the opportunity to do what they need to do. And that's kind of the transitional state of mind that we need within educational systems, within statewide systems, within federal systems, is that we begin to develop a connection between the land and the youth at a young age, because you can't just throw somebody in to a place that they have no connection to and expect them to have this deep, profound love for it. It's something that you have to experience yourself. So giving that opportunity to not only indigenous youth, but youth around you is what I would say is the best way to do that. If you can't do it for yourself, guarantee you can do it for the next generation.
Thank you so much. That's really a beautiful way to put it. And I feel like one of the things I'm just so impressed by you in the film, I was like, how young is this guy who's now becoming a leader in his community and teaching youth? I'm just, it's really moving to see someone at your age being such a leader for the next generation as well. It's really incredible. And Nephi, in the film also, you know, you talk movingly about your relationship with your older son, and then we see you with your toddler daughter, and how clear it is that that connection with your children, and again, then with the land, is in those relationships as well. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, yeah, it's to me, there's I think in parenting and being an indigenous person and kind of striving for better in this indigenous food sovereignty movement or universe or whatever you want to call it. I think there's no separation between land and identity, just like there's no separation with the language and food sovereignty, indigenous languages. And I think as we try to create new patterns in our lives for our children, it's really important for us to be conscious of our own histories and the histories of landscapes. I think there is so much jargon and information that it can become a barrier to community members and youth when it comes to the political, governmental, and human rights aspect of food sovereignty and access to land, and even just basic nutrition. I feel like across Native communities, what becomes a barrier is that a lot of times food issues and food and nutrition conversations, they're almost like at the end of the line, right? They're almost on the back burner, and they're almost end up being presented as consequences of like negative actions. So I feel like if we can just keep Native foods in sight, in mind, and create neat, innovative, accessible projects for youth and young adults, that really simple, keep it insight in mind, keep talking about it, we can begin to build the momentum for them, for a younger generation to get out and be involved in whether it's gardening or cooking. I think stripping away as many intellectualizing barriers as possible, like big words, intimidating, X, Y, and Z, but make it really fun and engaging. And us as practitioners, I feel like we've got a responsibility or a duty, not just to our students, but to the land and to the foodways, to teach with enthusiasm, to try to mirror that enthusiasm that brought us into the work. Because for whatever reason, we are in the field of health or academics or training other people, that sentiment that got us started, we can hang on to that and keep it fresh. And I feel like when we do that, we can be effective with the younger generation. And it's cool, it's fun. You know what I mean? They just can't just get too serious about the work. We remember it's serious, but we carry it on so that others can kind of find what we found in it too.
Yeah, that's great. You you mentioned indigenous languages as a part of this process, and in the film, I think Twila in particular flows in and out of her native language and English, and it's really fun to watch. But I'm wondering, are there any parallel efforts that are going on in your community or others that you're aware of to preserve language traditions that are kind of aligned, working together with food traditions?
Yeah, definitely. There's all across Native America, and I'm sure other indigenous cultures, there's the effort to retain and develop our languages. And the loss or erasure or disconnection with that comes from a long legacy of colonial violence that we've inherited. And our indigenous languages contain a worldview. And Twila would say and share that, it's the land and the food and the physical world that taught us our languages. And there's so many behavioral aspects to how we describe ourselves in our languages. And I think through foods, it's a really neat and engaging way to revitalize those efforts, because to me, I feel like there's no separation, because it's a mental health component. Like for me, I'm not a fluent Apache language speaker or Navajo language speaker, and that's been kind of a tender spot all my life as a Native person, not feeling like I completely fit in my own culture, but then also not feeling like I still, even though I got a grip on the English language, feeling like I don't fit in English or the American society, right? So there's conflicting paradigms, and that can cause some unnecessary stress, and it's very common. So I think as it relates to mental health and just really neat developments that can continue to educate and strengthen food systems, language on a micro-regional level is really important. And there's many, many great examples of that across Native America right now.
Absolutely. Sammy, we've been watching you work, building your garden there. I don't know if you, I don't know if you heard that. Are there any efforts to, rekindle or save some of the indigenous language in your community that just, helps to understand the food traditions and add to that traditional knowledge?
Yeah, so right now the Yurok language is one of the most it's the most documented indigenous languages in our area. And when it comes down to it, we got to think about how important it is for a language to stay in culture, a language to have a culture. But like I said previously, there's traditions and their culture. And so people, they wanted to teach their kids language. But, my grandmother told me when she was one of the last fluent speakers around our village, and she said, what you need to do is you need to learn Spanish, or you need to learn Hmong first, because that's going to help you more. And I never understood that. And the reason is because they were teaching their children how to survive, how to be alive. And if you are trying to survive, and if you are trying to, keep the blood flowing through your veins, it's really hard to pass culture. It's really hard to pass these traditions. And so the first thing to go kind of was language, because we needed to learn how to use English to survive, and even today, because even the way, we look still, and people say, I don't know how many times people tell I'm intimidating looking, but language is so vital to the community, and we have so many people fighting to save it. But the reality is we need to make sure that our people, have a space to use this language in it, because a lot of the things that we're using is so tied to the land that it's vital we have access to these places in order to properly teach this language, because it can't be taught in just a school in a classroom setting like modern Spanish class or something like that. And how many people recall everything they learned out of those classes in high school? And that's the ideal of people thinking, as long as we can do that, we'll be all right. But in reality, it all comes down to making sure people have a healthy opportunity, because I never wanted to be an activist. I never wanted to get into that. I'm a fisherman before all things, and I had to do a lot of things to ensure that I can continue that practice of my life and can make sure it's there for future generations. So language is huge for me. And, but on the other hand, I wish that we had the time to teach and focus all our energy on that. Right now, we're still fighting, some of the highest suicide rates. We're still fighting, a bunch of statistics that are placed within our communities. And I believe language has healing power to help with that, but we need to make sure that, our people get out of survival mode.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so important to, and it's finding ways to find that healing within people and on the land, and interconnected between the two. One of the things, Nephi, that you mentioned earlier were the importance of some of the cultivars that were out there in terms of our indigenous plant material that for thousands of years was a part of the staple food supply in communities throughout this continent. And without the continuous management of some of those species in an ecosystem and with the land management practices, I wonder if you have a sense of if some of those resources have diminished in terms of their utility as food products, or if there are, in the film, I think you even talk about a particular species of bean that has been sort of brought back into cultivation. And I wonder if either of you have thoughts about some real opportunities with certain species to bring it back into more widespread use and utility as food sources, where it maybe has been underappreciated for too long. Nephi, maybe I'll direct that to you.
Okay, what I would like to say is it makes me think of the food fact that 70% of the foods consumed in the world are indigenous cultivars. And I think to so many of those foods that are not exotified or specialty ingredients or superfoods, or that are kind of a rarity, I think the knowledge can be appreciated just as much as the cultivars. And then that way the acknowledgement of the ownership of those cultivars, like the journey of corn, for example, from teosinte to how it is now, the journey of wild rice, the journey of buffalo, the journey of quinoa and chocolate, and even the tomato, right? Because most people equate those indigenous ingredients with cuisines of the world, of Spain, France, Asia, India, all these other areas of the world, yet they are powerful examples of, again, traditional ecological knowledge. And so I feel like validating that food fact is just as valuable as bringing back specialty cultivars. And when it comes to bringing back and making indigenous foods or specialty ingredients, even the word specialty ingredient is kind of a Western phrasing or paradigm of our generation. So we still need to be able to protect what we reintroduce and circulate it in our communities, because there's examples like chocolate and quinoa and seaweed that have been taken out of the hands of the people that need it the most, that hold on to those traditions and developed them and held them for thousands of years, and it's exported basically, or taken away. So it's a thin line that I feel like we walk when reintroducing foods. And for me as a professional cook, I feel like I've become a little bit more conscious and careful, because I do look at a lot of these foods as teachers, in every sense of the word, and the lessons that they hold and the value that they have, not only just for me as a cook, but also for my community and communities across Native communities. So I feel like being very tactful and careful about how we are able to reintroduce foods is important, not only just to us, to our own Native communities, but to larger communities. And there is an economic need for us to do that in our own Native communities. But I feel like sharing those values, again, kind of mirroring what Sammy's saying in terms of reciprocity, that we continue to take care of ourselves as Native peoples, because the paradigm or the perspective of economy, from a colonial standpoint to an indigenous standpoint, you could say that a colonial paradigm of economy is power, property, prestige, right? And land ownership. Where in indigenous paradigm, you could say that it's people, land, and water, and spiritual economy. So there's two different paradigms, and I think finding a way to fuse and, again, converge those values that do relate to each other is one way to kind of tackle that issue. So it's a pretty big answer to a real simple question, but I think it is important because food is so vast. It really is. It's such an amazing and colorful and dynamic thing to be involved in, that we have got to consider everything. So thanks.
So yeah, love is no longer the secret recipe, it's reciprocity. That's how we got to move forward. That's what it is. That should be the new ingredient, is understanding what's on the other end of this food chain. Where is it going? What are we doing? And how are we evolving ourselves within these communities? Because so many times, like Chef said, we've seen superfoods on the market, and now my little cousin just showed me the acorns were trending on TikTok, and it's like, it's kind of scary. It is. It's kind of scary. It is, because it's like we're not even geared up to that for that fight to protect our resources on that front yet. We're still worried about people coming in and trying to take our water. So it's like, it's worrisome at the same time. And I think that, reciprocity within all systems, you don't have to. And then that's why I tell people too when it's about reciprocity, when you want to have respect for something, doesn't necessarily mean you need to take things from that culture. We can share values, and that's what's connected indigenous people that live so close together, but yet maintain boundaries that set respect. And for territorial purposes, is maintain the ability to respect what somebody else has doesn't necessarily mean that we need it, but it's okay to, coexist, create those relationships with the people, and make sure that those relationships are just as important as ingredients putting into your meals.
I believe I'm in. Am I in?
We can hear you. Yes. Welcome.
Okay. I apologize for we have very unusual Wi-Fi service in our areas. In some areas it's really good. And I don't know if I'm able to speak up at any part of that I've missed, and how much time am I allowed?
We would love to hear your voice and hear your thoughts. I think we don't have a hard stop at 4 o'clock, but we're about 5 minutes away from our scheduled end time. But Twila, if you have any thoughts you'd like to share, I think I'd love to give you the floor to speak up.
Okay. First up, I'd like to say thank you for the invite and allowing us the opportunity. Also to thank you for sharing Gather, and continue to share Gather. I wanted to show the landscape where we're talking about. I barely heard some about, the policies and new administration that are hopefully effective. We're praying for effective to help our communities as far as support. You're looking at policymakers that can actually make real change. When you look at lower and upper valleys of our region or where we reside, where they have that opportunity, they speak for the water, they sell the water, they sell the land, but us on the reservation, we are muted. We don't have a voice, and we don't have access to those type of resources that the outside communities do. We're talking about an area where I was at foraging. It's very limited resources as far as foraging is concerned, and we're talking about sovereignty, but yet when mining corporations and large farming communities extract and use a lot of these water resources, it limits the amount that's out here for the wildlife that's out here to help plants regrow, that help through the burns for it to rejuvenate and become alive and healthy and help provide for us. So having a new administration really gives me hope for policies that could be created to help support these communities in the middle area that are muted. I always say we're muted people now because it seems like we're forever talking about these situations, but yet nothing is done. It's just something people want to listen to. It's something that people, yes, they did voice that, but yet nothing is being done. But you see a new generation of people like Sammy, Nephi, and a whole lot of other people that are out there in Indian country today. They're educating themselves and preparing themselves to speak up and actually really continue this real fight for us, because it's they look at us for solutions, but they don't help us with solutions. And I feel we're very put to the back of a lot of decision making. Yes, we look beautiful, we're beautiful people, yes, but yet do they really want to help us? And that's the change I would like to see in today, and I would like to see more support for indigenous communities that are trying to support better themselves, better the community. You're looking at funding sources. It's so hard to tap into, especially for the type of work that I do. It doesn't meet federal guidelines. It doesn't meet certain criteria as far as grants. So you're looking, my grant was presently with the CDC. And that allowed me the opportunity and the ability to do what we are doing in a way that I know is effective, that can help people, that can heal people, that is reconnecting people not only to the land, but reconnecting them back to learning the language, the desire to learn language, and to bring the holistic realness of, you know, why continue extracting? Why can't we just live and be happy? Why do you have to keep taking and taking and taking? And why can't you let the earth rest? Why can't the industry, this whole global industry let the earth rest and find another way of making things happen? But, you know, truthfully, that's not going to happen. You know, we're just driving out here, looking at the land. Is that we're just talking about how the mining company extracts a lot of the water for that is used to support the mining companies from both ends. And we're like, why can't they just stop and just let the earth rest, let it heal a little? And eventually, there's going to be nothing out here. You know, you're seeing landscape trying to take care of itself. You don't see large farms on a reservation. You see alfalfa, but they tell us upriver, they say, oh, you can't farm because your water isn't suitable for it. But they have large-scale farming. You look downriver, they have large-scale farming. But it's because of the policy that was created for our agency, in our reservation, that does not allow you the opportunity based on what's written by policymakers. So we're hoping to see new changes and new people come in. And, you know, I'm very thankful for this opportunity. I don't know a whole lot about what I missed, but if you have any questions, my name is Twila Cassadore. I am from the Western Apache Diet Project. I am not a Stolzen. I am from the San Carlos Apache tribe. My email is tr_Cassadore@yahoo.com. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak on in a nutshell, I guess. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I think we have one last question.
We're so glad that we were able to call in, Twila, and we were able to hear your voice.
Thank you.
I do have one more question, and maybe we'll give you the first word on it. That is that it's something that we've heard in what you've already said, what Sammy and what Nephi have talked about, that, you know, the kind of depth and sophistication in which you talk about being an activist. And it's really impressive. And I'm wondering if you can say anything again for, you know, for some of us as educators, some of us on this call as students. How did you learn to become an activist, or what advice do you have for others learning to become, you know, activists, maybe reluctantly, but because it's the important work that needs to be done?
I don't call myself an activist. I call myself a truthful person. You know, we don't want to face the truth in many areas. We tend to put a lot of the truth in the back. And we're just bringing out the reality of what needs to happen, what needs to be done. And I love what Sammy's doing. I mean, I really admire the work he's doing out in that region. It's just so empowering for many young people. You don't see many young leaders like that out there. And you're seeing more young leaders grow within our communities. But just to connect with what you're passionate about, for one, connect with people in that community, or you find you can look anywhere, you'll find something that you will connect with. And in that connection, you will meet people that will help guide you, help guide you in what actions need to be taken. I myself speak about the land mostly because I'm here on the land. I work with the land. I know these plants. These plants are my family. They're my relatives. They feed me. They take care of me. But knowing that, I understand the need of change for policies and use of water and resource and minimizing certain things that are done in our community. So it's just learning, taking time to go and look at, what you yourself see as a need. And from there, I believe a lot of things will come to you in guidance. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. Nephi or Sammy, do you have any final words?
Yeah, I like to agree with what Twila said. I don't like personally identify as being an activist. What I think what I feel like what I do is just I try to be action oriented. I feel like to arrive at that place where the work might become activism is a result of some serious personal work in the beginning, taking action in my own life, really, and then letting that kind of evolve outward in the work that I do. And very much like Twila said, I speak a lot about the landscape and the food and our people and the mental health, because that's kind of the area of my work right now. And it is so important, I feel, that if we when we can get deep into the work, because in the beginning the work is it's very romantic, and it has this aura of mystique around it when we say a food activist, or colonization strategies, or indigeneity, or reclaiming health, right? Those have this really rebellious spring to it, and a lot of mystique, and that can kind of lead us astray in some ways if we're not careful, I think, as practitioners, because we can get caught up in trying to search for clout, right? We can get caught up in the wrong objectives of this movement. So what I say when it comes to being action oriented or engaging in realms of activism, I think really commit yourself to the work, where you get so deep into it that the mystique and romantic notions go away. And at that point is when you can really decide if it's for you. So we can continue the work when nobody's looking, when no one's there to congratulate us, when we're not getting the affirmations. Are we still willing to commit and put ourselves out there and continue this work? And I think that's when it becomes real. That's when it becomes tangible, and that's how we give it life and roots. So that's kind of what I would say about taking action. And I think it's just the nature of indigenous foods. Again, I think it just makes it cool and neat and dynamic. So thank you for that.
Yeah, same. It's the same thing. Activism at a young age. My grandmother, she fought for indigenous healthcare when everybody told her it was impossible and would never happen. And my mother and her cousins fought for indigenous education when California, and that would never happen either. And so activism, I remember when I was younger, I asked my grandma, I said, I really want to help my people, my family. And she said, well, you better become a psychologist, because a lot of your cousins are crazy, joking around with me. And I went and Googled that, and I told her, Grandma, I could do this. And she said, well, you really want to, I can teach you. And then it wasn't activism, it was just making sure that we knew the skills we needed to protect our way of life. And that's the difference. In activism, you can, there's activists, and I'm extremely thankful and grateful for those people, especially in the 70s, who helped create a lot of redwood forests in the area. And those are the people who have really no connection there, but they're actively engaging and staying connected. They're doing what they can to be there. And those, I believe that's an activist. I'm not the one. I'm not an activist. I live here. I don't have a choice. I cannot pick up and go to another cause. I can't just relocate. I can't do that. I'm here until the death of me, and that's the difference between it. And so I'm thankful for the people that come in and help, but it's so important to keep real and understand that building those human connections are what's important, because right now, what we're looking at is how our programming, how we can utilize micronutrients to kind of to relieve the ill symptoms of social economic depression within our communities, using traditional harvest management practices and using traditional deliveries, or delivering traditional foods. And doing that, we would never have the opportunity to understand what this means on scientific levels, or how to collect that data, if we didn't connect with college kids. So speaking to the next generation there, make sure you go out and you make these connections, even if it's outside your comfort zone. Be there, and that's how you become a part of a community, and that's where you find your home at. So acknowledge where your roots are and do that, but most importantly, acknowledge where you're at right now, and that's what's going to keep you grounded in the future.
Well, I think we've had an amazing conversation, and I really appreciate all the wisdom and insight you guys have shared. And actually, I don't know if you're able to follow the chat there as panelists, but there's been a lot of appreciation that's being shared for what you've had to say. And in fact, some people are saying you've inspired them to think differently about how they're connecting with youth related to soil science. And so I think you're definitely having an impact. I think the film is having a tremendous impact. And I know we're all wanting to do what we can to support your efforts. And I think part of having this time for you to share your thoughts is certainly part of that. And I hope that we'll be able to stay in touch and
yeah, thank you guys for this opportunity, and please just stay connected. If you have anybody has any questions or wants to further reach out, my email, I think I did the right email in the chat, but please reach out, get a hold of us. We're on Instagram, Ancestral Guard. Please just connect. That's the best thing we can do. Thank you guys for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. True pleasure.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you all for attending, and especially our panelists. And happy Earth Day, everybody. I think at this point I will we'll adjourn. And like I said, we'll look forward to following your stories and supporting you along the way.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day. Stay safe.
Okay. Bye.
Hope to